So, welcome to another Geek Show interview. I'm Graham Williamson. I'm here with Mark Cunliffe, another writer for the Geek Show, and most importantly, with Dean Puckett, whose first fictional feature film, The Severed Son, premieres at Fantastic Fest this year in Austin, Texas's legendary Alamo Draft House. Dean, hello.
Hello. Hi, Graham. Hi, Mark.
Hi, hi.
How you doing?
Pretty
We're
good,
great.
thanks. Yeah.
We've both watched the film. I finished my second watch of it about an hour ago. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. But maybe we should start by talking a bit about the origins of this because it's loosely adapted from a short film you made.
So in 2017, I made a short film called The Sermon, which was a kind of riff on Valerie and a Week of Wonders, Witchfinder General, the kind of unholy trinity, as they call it. Just trying to kind of take the folk horror genre, which I loved, and say something metaphorically about Britain. Although not many people pick up on this, the kind of central image of that film for me was it was written in a kind of post-Brexit, post-Trump frustrated moment. And so although the actual narrative is about a young queer woman rebelling against a kind of oppressive community, the actual visual metaphor was that crowd coming for you. And that's how I felt. I'm not saying I was walking down the street fearfully, kind of like worried all the time or anything, but I was trying to tap into a certain sort of anxiety that I felt, and I felt was in the air in 2016 when we all looked around to our neighbors and thought, hang on, half the country voted for this shit. Like, what? Yeah. So basically, that was what I sort of used as my guiding light. And then obviously, as a film lover and a lover of horror movies, I thought that feeling could be an interesting one to explore through the vehicle of folk horror. And so I wrote The Sermon, and we shot it, and it did really well at film festivals, and it's got a lovely little life. It's become like a little cult short film, which I'm so proud of because it gets new reviews on Letterboxd every day, and it was in all the Hornsby R's anthology box set, which I was extremely proud of because as a lover of horror, all cinema, frankly, but folk horror as one of my favorite subgenres of cinema, to be included on the definitive box set of the genre was like I was really proud of that. So that film basically had a lovely little life and continues to have a life. And then that's when all the trouble started. then I got commissioned and added to the iFeatures BBC BFI Creative England led scheme, which was essentially to finance, I can't remember how many filmmakers now, I'm going to say 12 writers, director teams to develop their first feature film. So I did that. If I'm honest, I'm not casting any aspersions on the scheme or anyone, but it wasn't really right for me. What I came out with at the end of it didn't really feel like it was actually the thing I wanted to make. I think that there's certain ways that films get developed in this country that sometimes actually work against the project. And I kind of, so we didn't get any further funding from BBC or BFI at that stage. That was in 2008. So, 2018. And so there was like a 5-year gestation period between essentially making The Sermon and then finally getting to shoot this film, which, as you say, it kind of takes the DNA of The Sermon and does something new with it. There's that central conflict between a father who runs an isolated religious community and a daughter who is rebelling against it. Those are the kind of, and it has the same aesthetic, a similar aesthetic, a similar kind of timelessness. You're never entirely sure when it's set, which is something that is very purposeful. I'd be interested to see how you feel about that. But it's something that's divided a few audiences so far. I think some people really go with that thing, or some people find it frustrating in some way.
It's very strange because I think it only struck me that I didn't know when it was set once I'd finished watching it. I don't know how you felt, Mark.
I think I sussed that it was very timeless, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, Dean, but I felt that was very purposeful because, you know, the central sort of common thread in any sort of witch hunt or moral panic for me always seems to be, well, you just point out the minority figure in the group, and you know, for centuries that has been women, or it's been gay people, or at the moment we've got trans people, and so for me that sort of timelessness was very key, I thought, because nothing has fucking changed. You know, it's still the same, isn't it? I mean, you could cast Andrew Tate as the pastor, really, couldn't you? And it wouldn't make much difference.
Well, I'm really glad you pick up on that, because that's exactly my intention. And if you look at the sermon,
Cool.
The sermon, it's present there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's because I guess I'm trying to the thing about exploring where we're at, and let's also talk about the fact very quickly that during that 5-year period of developing it from the sermon, which was a post-Brexit kind of explosion from me creatively, we've then had the pandemic, and we've had Black Lives Matter, and we've had, you know, these most recent knuckle draggers out on the streets, racists. So, you know, this thing has been bubbling under the surface, this fear of the crowd, this anxiety about you know, like what a group of the things that people can do to one another hasn't gone away. If anything, while I've been developing the film, it's got worse. Yeah. So those are so that's kind of now that where we're at, where I've finally got the money to make a feature film. And and we shot it last summer. MPI, Dark Sky Films, they read it. They were really into it. We slowly started to attach Emma Appleton. She read the script. She really liked it. We had a kind of this really like them. Then Jodie got on board, Toby Stevens, and then all of a sudden this incredible cast: Barney Harris, Lewis Gribbons. This lovely cast just starts to attach itself to the film because they like the script, and then that kind of snowballs. And then we another big bit of funding fell out, and then it was really Screen Cornwall who completely saved the day. But we made this film for less than half the amount that most significant first-time British features were made for. That's just a fact. You know, I'm hesitant to talk about this in a way because I sort of, you know, I haven't forefronted that in any of the marketing or anything like that, because I feel like I don't want that to be what the conversation is about. I want it to be like what the film is about, and then I would talk about it. I'll talk about this stuff afterwards, you know.
Sure.
I don't think there's any danger of that, because I think it is a remarkably cared for looking film. And I noticed that Ian Forbes, who's been your DOP through all of the shorts, is that correct?
Yeah, apart from The Devil's Footprints, which I shot myself.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, all of the short fiction films, yeah. So you know, essentially it all came together with under £500,000, and we shot it in 2 weeks, 12-day shoot. I was extremely specific, so when I knew that there was a chunk of money we didn't have anymore, and my producers literally said, look, are you up for doing this under £500,000? I was like, yes, definitely, let's do it, you know. But I had to then take that script again and do a very pragmatic rewrite and think about, what have I got? What can I do? What can I create within this frame with the money that we have within the time frame? And working so closely with Ian Forbes, as you said, to just think about, you know, what can we do within that frame? And then that's the film that's kind of emerged.
So I think it's a remarkable feature. I really do. And I think anybody who has sat through the last, as you say, the last 5 years of your short films will, I'm sure, and I'm probably speaking for Graham here as well, this is the feature that we wanted to see, really.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I picked up, and I'm never sure whether you should tell directors what their key themes are for fear that they'll either start doing it on purpose or start avoiding it completely. But when I watched your short films for an interview we did a while back for a different publication, and they all had that central theme of people trying to find an alternative way of life, trying to find some new system that their lives could be organized around, which comes through in the cult here. You know, they're not good people, but I think there is a core of something understandable in them. And I think Jodie May's performance in particular as this very fanatical but very desperate cult member is a really powerful restatement of that.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both of you. I really appreciate that. I think, well, we could, I mean, Jodie in particular, just as you've mentioned her, was just such an amazing actor to work with. And, you know, what I was so lucky about with it was that each of the cast members, you know, it is essentially an ensemble film. You know, that's another thing my first feature, I really bit off a lot because I was directing not only a film with a very low budget, but also an ensemble film, and trying to track those various arcs within the movie. You know, each one of those 7 characters essentially has somewhat of an arc that you can trace, you know. But Jodie in particular was just amazing at interrogating her character and her character's journey, because she goes from, she is the one that instigates the witch hunt, you know, against Magpie. And we really had to discuss, okay, when a woman is kicking this witch hunt off against another woman, what are the things that are driving that? You know, what is the kind of underlying denial that, you know, she's in? Again, we'll talk around spoilers, but I don't really care so much. It's like there's something dark going on in her house, but she's disassociating from it. She can't look at it. She doesn't. She sort of maybe knows in her heart of hearts, but she doesn't want to engage with that. And that's then just exploding out in this other way. She's otherizing somebody. You know, she's pointing everything at something else, so she doesn't have to look at it. You know, and we really worked on that. And Jodie just came to set every day and just gave it like 110%. Like there was no, you know, it was just focusing in on the emotional truth of that for her character, and just giving giving that intense performance every day. She took my breath away a few times, you know, like she, you know, and again, whatever people do or do not like about the movie and have critiques and whatever, there are just some moments in the film with all the actors, but with her at that hanging scene, for example, and it's just tears in her eyes and she's screaming and shouting. I mean, she's terrifying. But it feels real and true, and it anchors the whole film, because there are fantastical elements to the film. There is weird strangeness. There's moments where it almost and this is again intentional, almost tips into like a macabre sense of humor. Like, but actually, she's the glue to me that holds the whole film together, because she doesn't blink, she doesn't flinch. She's playing the emotion 100% the whole way through.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the other thing that makes the cultists kind of understandable is that Emma Appleton as Magpie is quite a sort of bold and unnerving heroine. You do like her in that she is going up against such a corrupt institution, but she's kind of frightening in herself, isn't she?
Yes, well, that's another thing. It's hard to describe her character without giving away spoilers, but she's so intrinsically linked to the creature in the film that I almost see them as both. I also see them as one character. And I'm constantly playing around with the idea that, is it real? Isn't it real? Is it her? Isn't it her? I'll be honest, there was a whole draft in a drawer somewhere where she is just in a mad suit and she's just murdering people, you know. So I played around constantly with that idea that and I think that's present in the film you've seen as well. Like, you know, every time you see the Beast, someone's either being traumatized, like, you know, when Flo sees it in the bedroom.
Yes.
Ursula, the character of Ursula, sees it in the bedroom. She's being traumatized when even when Magpie sees it at the end, she's been hit in their head, you know, with a I have a, you know, an internal logic that thing in the movie is a real thing, but I also intentionally built into the way that I made the scenes a potential reading that it isn't.
Well, I love that. I love that ambiguity of it, and I know that some people get scared of ambiguity in films, but you know, it's just cowardly of them, really, isn't it? Because it's fun to just dissect movies and constantly think about them and approach each viewing from a different angle to sort of try and get to terms with what you're being told, and you may change your opinion on it. But like you said earlier, you know, you may dislike the film, but you can't, you know, you shouldn't be in a position to fault any of the things that are being depicted or the way they chose to be depicted, because I think they're 100% valid.
Yeah, well, I think it's I like those kind of films. That's the other thing. You know, I like to go back, and I like it when you know, if I can watch a good old fashioned solid thriller that tells me everything and ends, and then I'll go and put the kettle on. I'm totally in for that too. But when a film has got a certain puzzle box feel to it, and I like it when you come out of the cinema and you're going, ooh, and you dissect it and you talk about it and you're trying to work it out and you're coming up with your theories. And I mean, this is the Geek Show, and I am just a massive geek when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's just, I love all that, you know.
Yeah.
And there was also there is a kind of, there's something about, I guess another thing was holding on to this idea that I really don't like heavy-handed exposition. And it was a real challenge, especially through the development process, but to make the thing I've made. And because if you think about it, there isn't really any exposition in the film. There's no real scenes where anybody just stands around and says, this is what's going on in the film. Or even some of the relationships, which was tricky. I almost went too far with it, because I think there is a moment, I think you catch up with it, but I do think there's a moment where you're like not sure who Lewis Gribbons, who plays David, who he is within that family unit. But then sometimes it's like, well, what would be the answer to that? He's the stepson that they were put together as children. Like, I get why it's good to hold people's hands to a certain degree, but then also I thought to myself, well, everyone's going to get it. Everyone's going to stand it. Everyone's going to stand the emotional reasons behind it. We know it's a forbidden love. We know they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. So actually, once we get into it, people will just catch up with it. I think it's another thing that audiences are quite up for and willing to catch up with stuff. Yeah. You know, rather than being told everything all of the time.
It's true. Unfortunately, there's a lot of studios that just think they have to lead the audience by the hand. And I imagine that, like we say, we don't know when this film is set. I could imagine if a studio had to take this on board, they'd be like, no, you've got to establish that. You've got to say where we are, what time it is, what era it is. Yeah. And as you say, you're just lending yourself to really terrible exposition at that point, aren't you?
It's definitely it's weird, because I've done a couple of screenings before the world premiere, not public ones, but you know, private things just to gauge what is and isn't working. Screened it to my friends and, you know, to people that worked on the film, friends and family and stuff like that. And I don't even remember, but there's a shot of a road with like road markings on it.
Yes, yeah.
That is weirdly one of the biggest talking points. Considering there's a sequence where a woman fucks a psychedelic beast in the forest. I'm a little bit kind of like that one of the most controversial shots in the movie is of a road.
Well, I did spot that, but I'm quite I'm autistic, so quite anally retentive about stuff. 2, I'm quite a scenery nerd, so I'm looking at it like, oh look, road markings. So I'm probably not the one to sort of say, yeah, I spotted that.
So for some people, that has been slightly divisive. Like,
Right,
even though it fits
right.
completely within the world I've created, and the kind of internal logic of the world that I've created, it's definitely divided a couple of people. Like, almost like, why have you've made a mistake? Why haven't you painted them out, or what? So it was a real talking point after the 2 screenings that I have had, the private ones, and I just had to sort of go, you know what? There's loads of films I watch that aren't perfect, but I love them. Like with A Fly in the Ointment. This actually links back to what we were saying about development, actually. There's that indescribable thing, isn't there? Some films have just got a bit of a fly in the ointment. They're almost amazing because they've got something that's not quite right about them. Just because it's the most recent thing I watched. Watched Alien the other day, the new Romulus, and wasn't that into it, but I liked.
Right.
It makes me think of like Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection, which I've returned to so many times, even though I know they're objectively not great, but they've got this almost like something about them that I almost just want to keep watching and work out why they're not quite right or what they are. And I think that sometimes as a filmmaker, it's a fine line. You just have to make a decision. Like, I'm okay if this alienates some people, basically. It doesn't mean it's not. And then there was another thing. Sorry, I'm rambling, but it is kind of relevant. There was out of one of those test screenings. I don't know if you remember, but at the beginning when she poisons her husband and he falls down, I never had that voiceover initially in the first couple of edits where she actually just says, she does the Hitchcock thing and just says, and now he's coming to drink the poison, which works brilliantly, I think. I'm really happy with it. But there was a few screenings where it was almost just the body language in the room was telling us that. And people just didn't understand that. They were like, has he had a heart attack? There's an ambiguity that wasn't an ambiguity I wanted. I wanted people to know she's the main character. She's done this thing. Boom, the film's about to kick off. So that was an ambiguity I wasn't happy with. So I fixed it,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about the scenery as well. I think one thing that anyone who's watched your shorts will recognise a great deal of in here is that you have a real sense of place and you're a very defiantly local filmmaker. Was it important that The Severed Son had to be shot in the Southwest?
I think it's always been important to me that I don't want to. The truth is, if somebody gave me the money and said, do you want to shoot your script in Iceland, then I would. So I'm not going to sit here and go, it's so important it's shot in the Southwest, because actually the God's honest truth is I would go and make my films wherever anyone had some money for me to do it. And I could lie to you, but that's the truth. However, I am deeply inspired by the landscape down here. I spend a lot of time on Dartmoor. I love the folk horror and the folkloric stories that surround this area, as you can see in my film, The Devil's Footprints. And, so yes, it is important, but, it was originally set on Dartmoor and then we got money from Screen Cornwall. And so I rewrote it and set it on Bob Min Moore. So for me, it was the metaphorical isolation that was the most important thing. I do think you could make this film somewhere else where as long as you had that sense of isolation, but then it would have still been a story which was inspired entirely by the Southwest, because that's where I live and that's where I draw my inspiration from. But there's a kind of like what you would love to say, or I would love to say that, like, but then there's the ideas behind that, like, oh, it has to be done here and da da da, and then there's the reality you constantly hit up against, especially when you're trying to make your first feature, where you're just trying to keep this thing from moving too far away from your original intentions, just to get it over the line, just to pull the finance together, just to get the cast in, just to get, getting this film over the line was so difficult. And I'm actually really proud because apart from like some of the budgetary restrictions and the time restrictions, I haven't compromised in terms of what I want it to be or what I want it to say. Yeah.
I'm glad Graham asked that question. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question about location, because when I watched it, I thought, well, I did pick up on the the political metaphors of it and thinking, well, this is obviously a very Brexit film, a very pandemic film, a very film forged in these weird fucking fires that were going in at the moment. And I thought, well, uniquely it is Southwest because of just off the Brexit question alone, you look at some of the voting history for that. You think, well, it's right that it's in the Southwest. It's right that it's Cornwall. But yeah, that's not to say that there are other communities, other rural communities that go through exactly the same thing, not just in Britain, but all over the world. So it's going to strike a chord wherever you choose to film it, really.
Yeah, but I think that I'm a British filmmaker, and this film is saying something about Britain. So I'm just I hope you don't think I was being glib. I'm very, very happy I got to shoot it in Cornwall.
No, but I would imagine that an audience who are watching it, as you say, it's going to Fantastic Fest. An audience is going to appreciate it. Firstly, on the fact that it is a British film and it's saying something about Britain today, but also they can reflect on what it's saying about their own community as well. I think it's got legs. Let's say it's a film that travels, definitely.
Well, there's definitely some universality in terms of similarity, even in terms of Western democracies and what's going on in America and what's going on here. I mean, luckily we don't have loads of guns, but we do have. There's definitely similar issues going on in terms of what would you call it? Is it like it feels like late capitalism crossed with weird internet bubbles? I don't know.
Yeah, that's
about
good.
right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it goes back to it also goes back to the I don't want to keep banging on about the road markings, to be honest, but it goes back to that in the sense that I don't see that as a mistake or anything. I see that as, again, it's that ambiguity, isn't it? It's whatever the audience chooses to take from it. Is this a community that's developed after COVID that have just decided to shun the rest of the world or the rest of the country and just strike out on their own? It doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter that there's road markings in the distance somewhere. It could be any time, any place.
Well, when I developed the character of the pastor with Toby Stevens, we discussed, his journey from. I don't actually want to reveal this, but because I just think it might take away from people's enjoyment and actually take away from that ambiguity. But let's just say that there's nothing ambiguous to me. I know, along with the actors, essentially know the internal logic of every through line in terms of like when this is set, all of that stuff. So all I'll say is that all of those things you see make sense in the internal logic, which has informed everything else in the movie.
Absolutely,
coming from like how and when the pastor started that community. So what I did was essentially I thought, you know what? I know that makes sense within the thing I've created, so I'm just going to leave it there, and that's an ambiguity I can accept. See, look how much we're talking about that shot of the road.
I know. I put my hands up to that one.
It's like you put a piece of art out in the world, and you have no clue what's going to happen. As I said,
it's going to snag on your brain. Yeah.
The sequence where she's like, I saw her fornicating with a beast in the forest, and.
Yeah, been there, done that, but a road.
Yeah, I think for me, the creature represents the id. It represents the darkness inside all of the characters, the potential for darkness that we all have inside of us, in the most, and So I just kind of there's all that creeping stuff and all that consuming things. It's all about how what choices are we going to make as a community. Are we going to allow that darkness to consume us? Are we going to allow ourselves to be tricked into thinking that immigrants are the problem, or are we going to are we going to open our eyes and see that maybe it's the people with the money that are the problem, the rich people, rather than having getting angry and trying to burn down hotels with other poor people in it? You know, that's just the most recent example.
That's true. Yeah, it's just what's happening now, isn't it? But there's
Exactly.
many examples. Yeah, I mean, the pastor has that brilliant line, doesn't he, where he says, you know, I don't believe in it, but it's useful to us.
Yes.
And that just sums it all up, doesn't it? You know, that's political class in a nutshell, isn't it? Really, I don't believe in this, but it's useful to us. Let's work with it.
I'm really glad you picked up on that. Yeah. And also, he says, you know, there's the scene where they're all standing around, and he's like, they have invited an abomination into our borders to threaten our way of life.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I don't, you know, we're talking about it in this way, but it is also just a kind of like good old fashioned pulpy, enjoyable kind of folk horror yarn.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I also wanted to ask, was there any influence in Western films?
Yes,
I was going to say, because there's a lot of shots that are very Western, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Do you know what I love about that? That was very much like the freedom I had to let the film evolve. So all of those things I talked about, which were hurdles to getting it made and restrictions, as is always the way with art and filmmaking, ended up pushing me to respond, to have a kind of creative response to those, you know, challenges. So what I found myself in this space where, because we were making it for such a low budget, I didn't actually have a lot of executives or people breathing down my neck when we filmed it. So obviously I was very restricted in terms of how much time I had to shoot things, and had to cut the whole thing down to its barest of bones and be extremely intentional with all of those shots and everything. But it also meant that, you know, I was like inspired by the landscape in the moment. It's like, okay, once you start putting people into a frame in a very composed way, because I didn't have loads of time to get a steady cam and fly things around. Not that that would be right for this film, but oh, look at those silhouettes in that landscape during Heatwave, which is when we shot it. That was another thing where the movie god smiled down on us.
Right, yeah.
And it was like, this looks and feels like a Western. I think the scene where that started to speak to me in the process of making it was the scene where they confront her by the wall, the pastor and John. They're standing, and then, you know, they're walking up and they have that confrontation. It's like that wide shot from the side is like, this film feels like a Western. And also then Lucy, you know, the costume designer, she made that choice. There was so much conversations about like what hats they were going to wear. Like lots of deep conversation with the costume designer about, you know, like Magpie starts with a hat on, then it slowly comes off as she becomes more liberated.
Sure,
You know, the pastor's hat again in silhouette against those landscapes. Those things spoke to me. I think that it's inherent in the text as well, though, because if you look at Witchfinder General, for example, that's kind of a Western.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think there's that kind of, I think there's something in that influence and in the idea of it being in the middle of nowhere, and all of those things, they're inherent in the text, but I think we drew them out much more aesthetically because I had the freedom to be inspired by the landscape and by what I was seeing in the moment. A really good example of that is the most on-the-nose Western reference was actually a creative response to a problem on the shoot day. So there's a sequence where Magpie's outside the house and she's chopping wood. I don't know if you remember. Yeah?
Yes, I've mentioned. Yeah.
And then basically she it's always in the script that a group of villagers kind of appear up on a hill, or in the script it was on the edge of a forest watching her, and then she turns in the script and she lifts the axe, kind of like ready for a fight, and then all the rest of the stuff happens. Shoot day comes along, nobody's fault, but basically the fake axe wasn't anywhere near the set, and we're in the middle of nowhere. Don't think I'm bobbing more, right? So we didn't have a fake axe. Now insurance, quite rightly, all the rest of it meant that like Emma just could not lift up the actual axe that we had in a scene. I mean, it would just be dumb if she dropped it. It wasn't blunted, so we had a blunted axe, a real axe, and a prosthetic axe, just so we could do certain things. for whatever reason, there was a mistake and it didn't turn up. So then I just had to go, right, okay, how the fuck am I going to shoot this scene? So I walk off and I just take a minute. And then I'm thinking about, as you said, like that there's this Western feel coming into a lot of the shots and leaning into that. And I just thought, okay, let's just keep the axe in the stump. And we'll just do the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, we'll do that. You know, I don't know if you remember now, but you don't actually see there's an insert of the axe going chonk into the wood.
Yeah.
And then she lets go of it, so she doesn't do it. And then we see the people on the hill, and then the axe is in the stump, and she just wraps her hand around it.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood style. And then we pull focus to the guys on the hill.
It's actually my favorite shot in the film. It really is. I love that sequence, and I love the fact, like you say, it marries that Western influence. But then I got with the villagers with their the pitchforks and the hoes and that reminded me a bit of Robin Redbreast, the old play today. You know, at the end when she turns back and they're in the horns and what have you. And I just thought, what a perfect marriage of both sort of genre tropes there. It's just perfect.
Yeah. Oh yeah, well exactly, and it's also one of my favorite sequences because there's basically no dialogue whatsoever, so it's like pure visual storytelling, which is another thing I've always been inspired by, silent films. That was what inspired The Sermon, probably more than any other thing, would be like Dreya's Joan of Arc, because you can watch The Sermon with no sound and you know everything that's happening. And I think not quite so much with this film, but there's definitely sequences that I'm just really interested in that as a filmmaker. I like to have as a baseline, like the imagery is pushing the story as much as is possible. And if I'm going to do exposition, I try really hard to build it in a way that feels natural. Like I really like the performances in the dinner scene between Toby and Barney when they're talking around the candlelight. I don't know if you remember that, but there's quite a lot of exposition delivered in that sequence. But I worked it and I worked it and I worked it, and then they're also fantastic actors, so they deliver it in like a really great way.
It really doesn't. It doesn't feel heavy-handed at all. It just flows. It really does flow in that scene.
I'm glad you mentioned Dreya as well. I was getting big sort of Day of Wrath vibes from a lot of this as well. Were there any specific films that you showed to collaborators as kind of an example of what you were going for?
Yeah, well, me and Ian very specifically watched The White Ribbon by Michael Haneke and Come and See. So we basically were like, if you look, there's quite a lot of like wide angle shots with people in the center of the frame, or very kind of composed images with you know, people inside of those frames, you know. And the amazing thing about The White Ribbon by Haneke is it's every single shot in that film is incredibly well composed. There's almost like not one shot in the whole thing that isn't really well thought through, and is doing the most economical way of telling that story that you could possibly do. We just went through The White Ribbon and we broke it down and we were like, okay, how is everything shot here? How are they actually doing this? This was when we realized how much money we had and how much time we had. There was a real pragmatic element to how we actually ended up shooting this. And it was just looking at those frames and thinking, and then also at Come and See, and just going, you know what, like so much of this is actually incredibly simple if you really break it down, but it's so powerful. So those things inspired us. And then another thing I showed was Maya Deren's The Very Eye of Night. I showed to Ian, and I showed him, and then obviously he'd probably already seen it, but we rewatched Rubber Johnny, because at one point I had, when there was a bigger budget attached, I had these. There's this psychedelic. There's this sort of sequence in the middle of the film where one of the characters, John, gets. Well, I won't spoil it, but there's a kind of psychedelic black and white sequence, if you remember. So we shot that on mini DV. But again, initially, it was going to be shot just like the rest of the film, but with like beautiful night lighting, you know, kind of almost Jonathan Glazer style,
Sure,
dark
yeah.
contrast, people naked running around in the forest. That's how I always imagined writing it. And then I just thought, right, I got the script. I knew how much money we had and how much time we had. And I thought, okay, how do I achieve what I want to achieve here with the money and the resources that I have? And I had already showed my adherence, The Eye of Night to Ian, even when we had money, when I thought we had more money, because I just love that. It's negative film, so it's I can't even actually sure how they did it, but all the people in it are dancing around, and they've kind of changed the film, the negative, so it's like you're seeing the people in the film. Anyway, it's a dance. It's a weird experimental dance film, and you've got these white figures in this black space, and it looks really cool. So I thought, right, how can I do that with no money? And I just filmed myself and my partner Liv in our house, like with all the lights off, with my night vision on, obviously thinking about Rubber Johnny, the Jonathan Glazer, the
Chris Cunningham.
Chris Cunningham video, and and I just turned it black and white, and I was like, this actually looks really cool. And so I bought Ian a mini DV camera, and he probably won't mind me saying, like, he was quite nervous about, is this going to work? What are we doing? Why are we shooting this on mini DV? And then there was almost like a moment where in the middle of the forest, there's like an extra with like no clothes on. He's like running with his bare ass through the woods. Ian's like looking down at this mini DV camera, and he just like looks up at me. It was almost like, what is it? What's his name? Who started Sundance Film Festival? What's his name? That guy.
Robert Redford.
It was like that meme of Robert Redford where, you know, like it's got like
yeah, from Jeremiah Johnson. Yeah.
On the DV camera, and he was like, "You were right, man." And so sorry, I have this really bad way of giving really long rambling answers to one question.
I'm loving it. I'm absolutely loving it.
Yeah, but anyway, so that was it. So I showed we watched Maya Deren and Robert Johnny for that specific sequence, and then I would say that Hanukkah and Come and See were the two main touch points in terms of how we would shoot certain scenes. Yeah,
great.
Before we stop, we should just talk about some of your collaborators on this. I know there were a lot of very new people working with you on this, and including some was it some students behind the scenes?
Yes, so that's a really important thing that I should mention, that again, because of the way we made it and the budget, we did an incredible traineeship mentoring scheme with Falmouth University. So I'm a lecturer at the School of Film and Television at Falmouth Uni, and we essentially partnered up a student trainee with every head of department. So, I mean, I cannot tell you how grateful I am to every single head of department that worked on this film, because at certain times they were having to take on a dual role of not only making a feature film under a hell of a lot of pressure, but also kind of teaching the people around them a little bit. And everyone that came on board the project did that with gusto and just, got into it. And by the end of the 2 weeks, I think the students were they've learned so much, and it was also a pragmatic decision as well. They got their name on some credits. They're all at university. They had a traineeship with an amazing professional. They have, and we were able to actually have the manpower to make a film on a low budget. It was just good for everybody involved. But again, it was a plunge, and it alienated a few of my previous collaborators. They were a bit like, lovely, I love you, man, but I got to pass on this because I don't think I don't want to work with students. And again, by the way, I respect that. I respect anyone. I respect anyone that's like, sometimes in this industry or in this life, saying no, sometimes you've got to say no, right? I've got this terrible thing of saying yes to everything, and then, you know, in the past. Now I think there's something really good if you can't give it your all, say no, and that's fine, you know. So there was a few people that did that, and but ultimately everybody that came on board in the end was really up for it. And you know what, the students, what they lacked in experience, they really added this kind of enthusiastic energy, which almost buoyed and carried the whole project over the line.
Sure.
So it was, again, I feel so blessed in so many ways. Like, so many things came together. What is it he says? The pastor says in the film, if you grind a diamond a little, you'll see it glisten. It's like that. All of the various like stressful pressures that were put on us in order to actually get this film made, weirdly, apart from a couple of things that I don't want to mention because people still haven't seen it, there's a few things. I'm a filmmaker. I'm very hypercritical of my own work, so there are things about it that I would do differently or would have done differently had I had more money and time. But you know what? I think for what it is absolutely categorically the best version of what it could possibly be under the time and the budget that we had. I also want to make a quick thing about the special effects and the prosthetics, because Neil Gorton, who runs Gorton Studios, again, we had like a team of like 20 people making prosthetic limbs, beast outfits. Ollie Mortman, who's in the film, who gets murdered by the beast, is an old friend of mine. He was in Circles. I don't know if you remember Circles. Yeah. So he it was really weird because I wasn't with him. He went to London to get scanned. They did a digital scan on him, and then I went to the studio in Falmouth where all these prosthetics MA students are working. I just walked in the room and there was like just Ollie on all fours with like all of this like guts ripped out everywhere, and it was so weird. I was like, I've known this guy for like 20 years, and there's just like a kind of weird sort of doll of him on the ground, you know, looking up at me, terrified. So now I keep that doll in my basement, and if I ever get a little bit lonely, I just go